Good morning. Welcome to the Mountain West Hoops Insider. Looking forward to a great new opening show today. And yeah, just wanted to kind of give some opening thoughts real quick, and then we'll get into our show. So I'll let Eli, our main star attraction, kind of open up, say who he is and what he does, and kind of get us going.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me on. I'm really excited for what we're planning on doing with this show on the Mountain West Hoop Cider. So I guess just starting off, I've covered Mountain West for about 5 years now. It's been an awesome league to cover, getting to know you and a lot of the coaches around the league, especially during your time at Fresno State. Just a really fun league that's always competitive, has some great teams in it. Saw that last year with San Diego State and Utah State, and just a really intriguing league with great players coming from different parts of the country, and really excited to get this thing rolling and talking about Mountain West basketball.
Yeah, excited about it as well. I got to know Eli back when I was at Fresno State, probably about 4 years ago, I think. So yeah, great dude. Does a really good job covering the league. And yeah, just I had 2 stints in the Mountain West. I was blessed to work for Jim Boylan back at Utah, and during the Marshall Henderson, Carlin Brown days. We coached against Jimmer Fredette and coached against Kawhi Leonard. That's when the Mountain West was a little bit different with BYU in it. And then I had a second run in the Mountain West at Fresno State. So yeah, just looking forward to covering this league. It's definitely one of the better mid-major leagues in the country, and Eli does such a great job covering it. I think it will be a great one to dive into. So without further ado, we're going to give a quick moment of silence all week for Coach Anthony Stewart, who tragically passed away a couple of days ago. So we're going to give a quick moment of silence. Thanks so much for respecting that. Okay, thanks so much. Definitely want to continue to pray for Anthony Stewart's family and his loved ones in the community at UT Martin. He was the head men's basketball coach at UT Martin. So, yeah, definitely want to make sure we're all telling our loved ones we love them, and just, you never know what tomorrow brings. So keep enjoying each day, keep being safe, and, yeah, just keep telling people you love them. So, so we'll transition into the Mountain West Hoops Insider. Tell us some opening thoughts about the league in general, kind of going into a new year. We know there's some unpredictabilities with the COVID. We'll talk about that later, but just tell us some thoughts on the league.
Yeah, it's I guess starting off, it's going to be a transitional point for the league. I think a lot of these teams were hoping to hear their name called for at least some postseason bids. San Diego State, obviously, what they did last year was just phenomenal. Had a really good opportunity to be at least a 2 seed, possibly a 1 seed. And with Utah State and Sam Merrill, what they did down the stretch was what we were expecting out of them all year long. So it's a shame to see those seasons cut short, just like every other league suffered in March. But especially when you have quality seniors like Malachi Flynn of San Diego State, with Merrill on Utah State, those types of guys. But I mean, you have to pack it up and you have to get ready for this.
Eli, I think your mic might be out real quick. Let's see. Hold on one second. We're having a little technical difficulties with Eli's mic. Let's see if it's working again, Eli. I think it was muted on your side. Give us just a second. Let's try again, E. See if your mic is working. Can you hear? Back? All right,
I got you now.
Okay, good. Awesome. So, yeah, you were telling us about San Diego State making that magical run and could have been a 1 seed or a 2 seed. That's kind of where we left off.
Yeah. Sorry about that. So I guess the main theme for me in the Mountain West this year is transitioning from the COVID shortened year with San Diego State and Utah State both putting together really quality seasons and having an opportunity cut short. Most of those teams were led by seniors, and also want to throw in Nevada with Jalen Harris and Lindsey Drew, those types of guys who were really productive as seniors. And they didn't have their chance to make their final postseason run, but that's the case for everyone else around the country. And now you have to pack it up and get ready for this season, whatever it may bring. So I think it's a transitional point for the league with a lot of new guys coming in and some of the seniors coming out.
For sure. What was your thoughts on kind of, before we talk about this year, what was your thoughts about the competitiveness of the league last year and just some of the overall thoughts of the league last year? I know it would have been 2 bids going to the NCAA tournament again, which is not common in mid-major basketball. So definitely shows the strength of the league at the top and top to bottom. So tell us a little bit about the league last year and how you thought the competitive race was.
Yeah, it was competitive, even though San Diego State was, I think, far and away the favorite in the league. And I know that they didn't win the Mountain West tournament, but they still, on paper and for the most part on the floor as well, they were the most dominant team in the league. But when you look beyond just San Diego State, you had a number of teams that were also competing for postseason attention. You had Nevada that had a really strong season with Steve Alford. Boise State looked competitive at times. UNLV was a big surprise. I thought they were pretty intriguing with TJ Altenberger. So it's a lot of competitiveness within the conference. And I think now that San Diego State has lost some guys and Utah State has as well, I think it levels the playing field even a bit more. So you have a number of teams that could rise and have a really good season this coming year.
Absolutely. We're going to pause really quick, set a couple things up for the rest of the show. We'll be back in about 30 seconds. Okay, welcome back. Just still working out some of the kinks early on. Eli is going to share his on his Twitter handle. He is going to share the link as well, so the followers of him can also see the show this morning. So we're kind of getting kicked off. We'll let him kind of get that going, so you guys can follow there too. So for All Access Network, you can follow us on our YouTube page at All Access Network. You can follow us on All Access Coaches Corner, which is part of the All Access Network. Which is All Access _CC. You can also follow us on All Access Sports Media, which is All Access _SM. That's on Instagram and on Twitter. And then we'll also always be posting from and streaming from Facebook, and we'll continue to add new streams as we continue to go on. So, Eli, you set to go over there. You got your Twitter followers following as well?
Yeah, I'm sharing it out here real quick, and we'll be good to go.
Awesome. So we'll go through the league alphabetical order and just talk about each team. And then at the end of the show, we'll kind of go 5 general questions and top general topics going into this season. And then we'll close. And so this show will be an every other week show. So we'll go bi-weekly. I will be on with Eli every week on Tuesdays at this time. The other Tuesdays that we are not doing Mountain West Hoops Insider, we will be doing a show that a brand that he's working with and he's helped create, and Heat Check College Basketball. So we'll let him talk a little bit about that real quick, and then we'll go straight into Mountain West.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. So we've got 2 shows now that we're working on.
Right.
The first here being Mountain West Hoops Insider, and then we'll be alternating between that and our Heat Check College Basketball show. Really excited about that. We've always wanted to have, one of the great faces in college basketball come in, and with your coaching experience, I think that would bring a really cool asset to that show. But we're looking more into looking at national coverage, more so on the mid-major side, highlighting some of the big stories in college basketball and bringing that to heatcheckcbb.com, which is the website that I founded. We've got four to five really good writers on that website, and we're looking to build really quality national college basketball coverage, and really excited to get that one going. I think that'll be a really good time.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun to dive into some hot topics in college basketball. And me and Eli had kind of just this vision of combining his skill and ability to cover and be a great journalist and a great guy who just covers the league in so much depth and covers the country of college basketball, and then kind of just bringing a former college basketball coach to add some different perspective to and just have some fun. So we'll continue to make fun and interactive ways for you guys to be involved and continue to learn more about the Mountain West and about the Heat in college basketball. So moving transition. So we'll go straight into Air Force, alphabetical order. We have a new coach in. Their last coach is still in the league, just got hired in the league, it looks like. And they had a great run under coach. And sometimes coaches, as we know, have to make a transition, have to make a change. So Air Force decided to make a change, and they have a new coach that is back, from what I understand. So tell us a little bit about Air Force.
Yeah, so Air Force was one of those teams that I was kind of hoping would have a bit of a breakout year this past season. Didn't exactly happen, but with Lavelle Scotty and Ryan Swan-Four, both moving on, it was kind of a transitional phase for Air Force basketball. So they're moving on from Dave Pilipovich, who was there for several years, and a coach who I thought did a really good job. Air Force isn't necessarily a program that is super easy to win at or even bring quality talent in, but he fielded some competitive teams, and he's now with the staff over at New Mexico, which I think will be a good fit for him. So the new face now with the program is Joe Scott, and kind of a new face. Was previously with the Falcons, and he was the most recent head coach to lead them to an NCAA tournament. So I think it's a move that Air Force wanted to make to kind of get back to their competitive ways in the early 2000s. They're really going to slow things down and play methodical offense. But for the upcoming season, again, like a lot of the teams in this league, you have several contributors who have left either via transfers or seniors graduating. And so you have a lot of freshmen or sophomores, unproven sophomores that you need to step up. So it's going to be an intriguing team, and to have Scott implement his system, I think will be good for the program, but it could take some time.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a great run that they had with under the last regime. And I know Coach Scott, they're excited, it sounds like, to have him back. Let's talk a little bit about the team. Let's talk about the roster. Let's talk about kind of some of the offseason moves and kind of go from there.
Yeah, so I think the main point here for Air Force is what their backcourt is going to look like. As I mentioned, with the forwards heading out with Scotty and Swan-Four, I think that's going to be really difficult to replace. And with Air Force, it's so challenging to know what their newcomers will look like, just because, again, it's a program that operates so differently than any other one that you'll find around the nation, just with it being the Air Force Academy. But I think they're going to lean heavily on AJ Walker. He was a starting point guard for them last year. In the spring, he kind of dabbled with potentially going to a power conference school, and some of the assistant coaches who I talked to out west, they firmly believe that he was going to head to a power conference, but he wound up deciding to return to Air Force, and I think that is at least a building block for them. It's always good to have experience in the backcourt, and knowing Scott's system, I think that'll be a nice fit for them to keep the train moving a little bit. But beyond that, I mean, you have a lot of question marks. Chris Joyce would be the team's second leading scorer, and he's just around 6 points per game. So you're going to have a lot more scoring output to field a competitive team this year, or it could be a bit of a long season.
Yeah, you mentioned system. So and Coach Scott's system. Talk a little bit about what you know about the system that we running at Air Force.
Yeah, so he's going to slow it down a lot. That's kind of the system that he ran, and this goes all the way back to his time at Denver, where he implemented this type of system that is rooted a lot on slowing things down, making sure that teams are making the right passes, and also I think that they're going to be heavily reliant on what the perimeter looks like. So I mean, it's going to be a lot of 3-point shooting and making sure that the team finds the open guys. So, I mean, it's going to be fun to watch. Air Force is a team that is usually pretty reliant on that type of system and going with the Princeton offense, making sure there's a lot of ball movement and motion and things like that. So it'll be a good fit. And I think that in itself will be enough to upset some of the mid-level, high-level teams in the conference just from time to time. But again, it's going to take some time for this all to come together and have the roster come together as well.
Yeah, it usually takes time when you have a new coach and there's a transition, and they lost a lot of really good seniors. Was definitely a big acquisition to get a potential transfer to come back. So that's always a huge addition when you can recruit your own players to come back that are good. Anything else Air Force wise that kind of sticks out that maybe they can make a certain run or make a certain spark in their season if X player that they brought in plays well, or any kind of circumstance that maybe just they can kind of exceed expectation in their first year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of the young guys growing up or at least taking on substantial roles early. And I mean, it's always going to be the case with Air Force. You just never really know who's going to emerge out of that freshman group. I have heard, though, that I think CJ Hott is a forward who I think could have some potential long term. But again, most of this is built on just kind of what you read about certain players. It can be kind of hard to track down, again, just being members of the Air Force Academy. But with Air Force, I mean, it's going to be a long bench. You have a lot of guys who are going to contribute. The lineups are probably going to change quite a bit. So it'll be an intriguing team to watch, especially with Scott returning to a program in which he had a lot of success with, even though, again, Air Force isn't a program that is necessarily winning 20 games every year. But, I mean, he proved he can win 25 plus there. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, talk real quick before we transition to the next team, a little bit about those that may not know. The Air Force is a really unique team in the Mountain West, and kind of even their setup as a school, obviously an institution that's military-based, and kind of some of the parameters that they have for recruiting and how they kind of have their day-to-day schedule is much different. So very different team than anyone else in the Mountain West. Talk a little bit about that and kind of what makes them unique before we transition to Boise State.
Yeah, it's a very regimented schedule that all these players have to go through, and it's kind of fascinating when you see what it's like being a student athlete at a place like Air Force or Navy or Army versus any other college in the country. And I listened to a podcast a while back from Matt Mooney, who was a former Air Force player who transferred over to South Dakota and then Texas Tech, who's had a nice NBA career. And he kind of laid down what his daily schedule is like, just attending classes and trainings, and then being sure that he has to be available for practice. And it's just a lot more in addition to what the standard college life is. And to be quite honest, a lot of student athletes aren't cut out for that, because it's very, I mean, it's nonstop from morning to night. You're focused on something, and at the end of the day, it makes really disciplined players who are able to fit into a system and do a really good job. So again, a lot of players aren't cut out for it, but those who do, I think, take a lot away from their experience at Air Force.
For sure. Thanks for that great coverage. We got a quick comment from one of our viewers. Coach B, my guy, glad to see you guys doing these previews. Great job. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for tuning in, man. Thanks so much for the support. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, and hope you continue to support. So thanks so much for the comment, Kevin. So we'll transition, man. We'll go to Boise State. I know we haven't talked about your predictions for the league. We can kind of go over that if you want real quick, and then also we'll go into Boise, who I believe you had picked at the top of the league.
Yeah, so with Boise State, I mean, it's it's going to be an interesting team because of all of these new parts that are coming into this program. But I think the number one guy you want to start with here is Derek Alston Jr. He's a player who I've had my eyes on for quite a bit. Didn't come into this program as a highly ranked recruit. He was even an unranked recruit who was a former walk-on, and he's now probably going to be a pretty decent asset in the NBA at some point. But for now, he's a really athletic 6'9", 6'8" guard who plays quite a bit on the perimeter and very athletic. I think he's going to be made a lot better by some of these new additions that are coming to the team. You have just several quality transfers that are coming from mostly the Pac-12. Some of the guys who I'm thinking about, Abu Kijab, who's one of the returners, who's a former Oregon guy, Devonair Dutrieve, who's over from Arizona, Emmanuel Akot, who also is from Arizona, who's a former 5-star recruit, Mladen Armis, a former ETSU center. I mean, the list just goes on and on. There's so much talent on the Boise State roster, and I think top to bottom, it's the most deep and talented team in the conference. But again, I mean, as you know, the talent doesn't always win the games. It has to all come together, and I think that's why some people have a bit of a hesitancy to fully buy into Boise State, just because it's so many new pieces, and a lot of these guys are either former mid-major stars or they're highly ranked recruits who weren't necessarily productive at their most recent team. So, I mean, the season could go a lot of different ways, but I think overall, Boise State's probably a lock to finish, I'd say, at least top 3 in the conference. There's just so much talent and depth on this roster.
Yeah, you mentioned, I'll kind of go back to what you talked about. You mentioned Derek Alston, whose father played in the NBA, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So came as a walk-on, I believe you said too, and I think that's kind of his story, and just kind of a self-made guy. So when I was in the league, my last stop at Fresno in the league, they had Coach Rice does a tremendous job. We know that. He's definitely a great basketball coach. He had a player named Chandler Hutchison, who was kind of a guy similar in the fact that, you know, a 6'7", 6'8" wing who had this kind of NBA type of body and athleticism, and really kind of came into his own, and then I think ended up getting drafted by the Bulls. So they were good that year, and this team reminds me a lot of that, maybe even more talented than that. And Derek Alston Jr. reminds me similar to Chandler Hutchison. So definitely a guy that'll be at the top of the list as far as players, first-team all-conference projections, and a preseason potential player of the year type of player. And you talked about a lot of the transfers and being talented top to bottom. They have a lot of guys, like you mentioned, who may have went to higher conference schools, may not have had the role they wanted to play. So they've done a good job sitting a lot of those guys out. So part of the challenge will be kind of getting all those guys to mesh. So talk a little bit more about some of the other returners and just how you maybe see those guys fitting all these pieces of talent together.
Yeah, well, first off, I really like the Chandler Hutchison comparison, and I think I might have mentioned once or twice about this kind of how this parallel with Boise State players, how a lot of these guys can come in as unranked players or as maybe fringe 3-star players and wind up having pretty significant roles within the program. And Hutchison is a good example for Derek Alston. So I'll be curious what Alston can do in his senior season. But some of the other returning guys, Ray J. Dennis is one who I think is particularly interesting. He was a freshman this past season, and he did some good things. Still a little bit inconsistent, which you can expect out of some of the year one players who are kind of thrusted into these roles. But he had some games where he just broke out, and you can kind of see the potential being met for Dennis. And I can expect him to have a big role in backcourt, a pretty intriguing player there. And then also Abu Kijab, who's, again, the Oregon transfer, and he's going to do good things on the wing. And I think he plays a lot like Emmanuel Akot does. So I'm curious if those two wind up playing together or if they're remaining separate within the lineup just because there's so much depth. But again, it's a really intriguing lineup. And I think that Rice can go a number of different ways with how he wants to play, whether that's a team that's more rooted in perimeter shooting or if he wants to be more physical or if he wants to play more up tempo. I think he can check all of those boxes, but it's going to be a matter of how it all comes together, especially in an off season like this where so many of these guys have been away from competitive basketball because of COVID. That's another concern that I have. But I think, as you mentioned, a lot of these players have had their redshirt year, so they're familiar with Boise State's system.
Yep.
And a lot of the times, those teams that do struggle with transfers, I think they're mostly based around teams that are or players that are grad transfers that aren't necessarily as familiar with the system and familiarizing themselves with the coaching staff. So I think overall Boise State's in really good shape.
Yeah, definitely. When you can have a familiarity from sitting out and getting some acclimation to a system, to a staff, to all those things, it just gives you kind of a different advantage. We talked yesterday a little bit about just that stability and being able to who can adapt to surroundings and challenges, and adversity is kind of a defining moment for everyone every season. And the fact that you have some guys at Boise State that have set out and some guys that are returning, it just gives you kind of a cohesion that is really important in times like this. We got a comment from our family member here, Kevin Sweeney. He says, "Give me all the Boise stock." So apparently, Kevin Sweeney is on the boat for Boise. I believe yesterday, and he's our co-host for College Hoops Coast to Coast here on All Access Sports Media, and he picked Boise to actually finish first in the league.
Okay.
Picked San Diego State second, and I believe Eli, your pick was San Diego State first, Boise second. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's close though. I think Boise State has a legitimate chance to reach up into that number one spot, but it'll be pretty competitive at the top.
Absolutely, we wouldn't want it any other way. Let's talk about Colorado State, a team that in coach's third year. Am I correct on that? Going into year?
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right.
Into his third year. Nico Medvedev is going into his third year and have a great amount of returners as far as some of their impact guys. A little bit still on the young side. Lost a big player in Nico Carvacho, who was a really impactful. He was in the league 4 years ago when I was in the league at Fresno. He was, I think, may have been leading the country in rebounding at that time. So they lose a big one in him. We know that they have some talented guys back, and they always acquire more. Their staff does a tremendous job. Tell us about Colorado State.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head there with Nico Carvacho heading out. That's going to be a big loss for them, just the presence that he brings, and he's such a productive rebounder. I want to say either sophomore or junior season, he led the nation in rebounding, and he's always been a double-double threat. So replacing him is going to be tough, but I think that Nico and his staff can do a good job kind of changing their philosophies and maybe playing a bit more up-tempo than they have with Nico heading out. It's a team that is going to be extremely perimeter-based, I'd say. Most guys on the team have capable three-point shots, so they're going to always be a threat just based on their perimeter shooting. I think the number one guy that you have to talk about here is Isaiah Stevens, who was last year's breakout freshman, averaging 13 a game and really setting the tone for the CSU offense. I think he could wind up being potentially the next star in the Mountain West if he isn't already. He's just really skilled and does a great job facilitating this team while also hitting some key important buckets for them as well. And I can only imagine his role increases as time goes along. And now with so many returning players on this roster, I think CSU is one of those teams you have to kind of pinpoint as a potential breakout team. And Nico has this, I guess, history of taking rosters and just making them better over time. He seems to do a really good job with player development, and I would imagine that continues this season, but it's going to come down to what they do defensively. That's been kind of a bit of a challenge for them if we have to pick either side. But I think if they are able to come into maybe like a top 100 defense or maybe even top 75, then they're absolutely in the same conversation as a team like Boise State or San Diego State.
Yeah, we got a few comments from our viewers. Got Coach Darrell Robinson's cousin. He's ready, saying Kendall Moore is ready for some action. And then we have another one of our listeners saying, "Let's go Rams, CSU alum." Yes, you definitely covered that well. And speaking to their staff, it sounds like they're really excited about their team. Feel like they have a pretty strong 8 to 9 man rotation. They love the strides that Isaiah has made. Kind of funny go back story. So when I was at UTEP, we recruited Isaiah Stevens and offered him there. So I know him well. I actually coached his older brother, Barrington Stevens, who played at South Alabama. So shout out to him. He's in Dallas now, working with Tyler Ralph, doing some great skill development work. But Isaiah, tremendous kid, tremendous worker, and just his feel for the game. So excited about what he did last year as freshman of the year, and definitely a guy that we're all going to look around and say, man, he's still there. You know, he's kind of continuing to win a ton of games. Should be a guy that helps them win 20 games a year and have, a 20-game average per win year by the time he's a senior, where he's won, 80-something games by the time he's a senior. So looking forward to seeing how he leads them and even more as a returner and being more comfortable. Roddy, of course, they're excited about the jumps and strides that he's made. He's a big, huge part about their team. Kendall and Adam, they talked about both having played 30 minutes a game almost since they've been there. So even though they're juniors, the fact that they played so many minutes kind of gives them a lot of senior experience. Talked about their rotation to 5. They'll kind of go back and forth between Deshaun and James at the 5. Big shoes to fill with Nico. They'll have to do it differently, but they're excited about that. They love the fact that everyone that touches the floor can make threes. They feel like that gives them a kind of a unique style and a unique asset that they think everyone can shoot at least over, 33%, make 1 out of 3 from 3, and that makes them a threat to continue to space the floor and do what they do well offensively. But really skilled. They enjoy playing basketball together and talking to their staff. The team loves the process and wants to keep getting better. They're ready for challenges. They know that defensively is kind of something that the scouting report is kind of out on. If they can, like you said and touched on, if they can get kind of in those certain ranks number-wise defensively, it puts their team in a whole different level. But they love their buy-in. They have a super competitive group and a lot of guys that were young that are 1 year older. So they're really excited about the leadership of the program too, and just the competitiveness and buy-in to the group. So that's the any other thoughts on Colorado State before we transition to Fresno?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it there. That's good input on CSU, and I'm curious what they do defensively now that Carvacho's gone. I think that's probably the big question for them. Carvacho wasn't necessarily a big rim protector or a shot blocker like some of the other guys in the league, but he's still, I mean, a great interior presence. And when you have a guy like that who can get you 10, 12 boards a game, that will always help your defense. So I would imagine, and you, I'm sure, have input on this as well, but I would imagine their philosophy changes a little bit just based on what their rotation looks like this year. But when you have the shooting that they have, when you have a quality guard like Stevens, I think that they're always going to be a threat to win games, especially at home at Fort Collins, where that's a tough place to play.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. One of many places in this league that are tough to play, and you kind of don't think, okay, we're going to Colorado State. Doesn't necessarily have the fan history that maybe some of these other places have, but man, is it a great home environment that they have, and the place gets real loud and gets rocking in there. So, yeah, best of luck to Colorado State along with Boise and Air Force as we get going. We will talk next about Fresno State, a place I've been a time or two before, spent some time there under Rodney Terry during that time period. Looking forward to what Coach Hudson continues to build there. Of course, he was had a tremendous year his first season. I think he might have been the new National Coach of the Year or some kind of award that he won for the success that they had in that first year. And now they're going into year 4, if I'm not mistaken. No,
yeah, I think it's either 3 or 4.
It's 3. It's 3. So they're going to year 3. So last year, they had a different roster than the year before. Had a lot of seniors. The year before had kind of a new roster, and then now they have kind of a transition roster. They have some faces that have left, some that are new that are coming in. They feel good about their talent and some of the upgrades they've made in talking to them. Tell us about Fresno State and your thoughts on them.
Yeah, I think that they recovered pretty nicely from what was looking to be a pretty challenging offseason for them. It's a roster that really got decimated by transfers, a lot of players heading out. Also, Navin Hart, who surprisingly left for the NBA. He had a lot of pro skills, but I think they were probably pretty caught off guard about his decision to leave when he did. And then also some seniors leaving as well. So it's going to be, as I've mentioned a number of times on the show already, a transitional phase for Fresno State. And I think Justin Hudson and his staff have done a really good job to date, making the most out of some really quality rosters, and going back to the days of Deshaun Taylor when he was there, Nate Grimes when he was there, a lot of really good players within the program. But I think with Fresno State this season, I guess at first the first thing that needs to come around for them is some of these transfer waivers, because you have a lot of these guys who are waiting in the wing who could be pretty significant additions so long as they're granted waivers. And now just 8 days away from the start of the season, it's kind of crunch time for those to get passed. But there is a lot of talent on the roster. I think the main guy that you want to talk about in terms of a newcomer is Devin Gage from DePaul. And he's had a bit of an injury challenge these last couple of seasons, but he has had a pretty successful run at DePaul. And I think now with Fresno State, with some of the departures heading out of the program, he should have a pretty substantial role to do what he does best. And he scores the basketball and can do a pretty good job leading the team. So he'll be one to watch, and he's already gained eligibility, so he should be good to go. And then the top returner is Orlando Robinson, who I like him quite a bit. I think he could wind up doing really good things for Fresno State long term. He's one of the pretty solid, highly rated guy coming in the post. Was really productive his first season. And Fresno State, I mean, as you know best, they've got a pretty long line of quality forwards and transfers. You know, Nate Grimes being one of them, Bryson Williams, some of those types of guys who've done a really good job. And I think that there's every reason to believe that Orlando Robinson could be that next 3-4 year player who consistently scores in double figures for them.
Yeah, what a history of great players at Fresno State, going back to the Rayford Austin days, and Corey Alexander and Paul George is the most famous name. Of course, has played there. Coach Hudson has actually coached and recruited Kawhi Leonard, so he knows about the best when he was at San Diego State. Coach Hudson, what a great guy and great coach. I'm excited to see what they do this year, and congratulations to Coach Felton being named promoted to associate head coach there as well. Yeah, I think you talked about some of their waivers. It sounds like, talking to them, they actually have a waiver for Isaiah Hill already that went through, that they're really excited about him. California kid coming back home. They feel like he's a big piece to their puzzle that they needed to get a waiver for. They like their group and talking to them. They've improved their talent level in some areas they really wanted to. Orlando's making some big strides, kind of like we talked about Isaiah Stevens and David Roddy for Colorado State, being freshmen in the league and kind of figuring it out as the league went on. He's one of those guys that they're expecting big things from as a sophomore. They also really like Holland. They're really excited about the progress that he's made. Sounds like their young big kids are coming along, and they're excited about their progress. Deion Stroud, a Fresno kid who I was blessed to coach at UTEP for a season, and he has not gotten a waiver officially yet, but talk about get your popcorn ready. I mean, this dude is a freakish NBA athlete, plays above the rim, a really hard-playing kid and great kid, and look forward to seeing kind of what he's able to do with and their style of play and how open and free-flowing he should be able to play there. So looking forward to that. And, they've had some challenges. They didn't have a lot of summer school as far as having their guys on campus. They weren't able to do much. They've kind of got it started, I think, maybe 5 days before their official first practice day was the first time they really got to get on the floor. So they've had some transition and some challenges many California schools have. Just talk a little bit more about Fresno before we kind of transition out to the next team.
Yeah, I think that they're going to, at least based on what I see with their roster, it seems like they're going more into some of these just multi-positional type guys. I think Stroud's a good example of that. A lot of guys who can defend multiple positions and can play either in the post or at the perimeter. So that's always going to make them a bit more of a challenge to go up against. And I think these newcomers coming in, they realize that, and they'll have kind of that, as you mentioned, that freedom to do what they do best. And I think some of these newcomers are pretty interesting too. Braxton Mia is a guy who is one of the higher rated commits in the program's history, and him being a 7-foot center, I'll be intrigued to see what they do if they choose to have Braxton play alongside Orlando Robinson for a really tall front court, or if they are interchangeable to some sense. But I've heard a lot of good things about him, and I think that regardless of how his first year goes, I think in the long term he could be a really big asset to the Fresno State program. And just mixing the new talent with some of these returning guys like Robinson, I think that it's a team that could potentially surprise. But again, it's a matter of what all these guys look like, and again, with it being a COVID shortened off season, it's going to be a bit of a challenge for it to all come together really quickly.
Yeah, definitely always a challenge. And like I said, they're a little behind as far as their ability to work at times. They're in the off season with new guys. That can be a challenge, but we know that their staff is they have a top-notch coaching staff and great leadership. So we expect to see great things from them as always. Let's move to Nevada and talk about the Wolfpack.
Yeah, it's another team that I think in some ways is kind of like Fresno State in the sense that they had a lot of players departing in the offseason, but I think they do recover pretty nicely. Again, moving on from you have Nisre Zuzwa who left, Lindsey Drew who left, and of course the big one being Jalen Harris, who was just phenomenal down the stretch. He was averaging, I think he had a stretch where he had maybe 35 points per game over 6 games or something like that. Just unbelievable what he did for that program, and he's off to the NBA. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge, I think, for Nevada to score some points, but they do have good news with Grant Sherfield being the Wichita State transfer who's coming over. I would expect him to start at point guard immediately. He would hope to get a bit more efficient offensively, but I think that he's already primed to be a double-digit scorer for them, and also probably lead them in assists. So he'll be one to watch. And then Desmond Cambridge, who is a Brown transfer. I've watched quite a bit of him, and he's interesting in the fact that he's largely listed as a guard, but I find it that he does his best work when he's operating either on the wing or the post. He seems to be really good with his back to the basket, doing a lot of these double moves and hitting fadeaways and things like that. So that will be pretty interesting to watch how those two work alongside each other. But then beyond that, I think you're relying on a lot of these returning sophomores to step up. A lot of these guys didn't get a ton of playing time this past season, with Nevada being so senior heavy a season ago. But a lot of these guys being sophomores, you have Kane Milling, who's a wing, KJ Himes, who I had pegged as my freshman of the year this past season. Didn't necessarily live up to expectations, but you know that his talent level is pretty high, and maybe it just takes a little time for him to really come around to his development. But Nevada's pretty interesting, and I think that they could be pretty deep so long as their young talent comes around.
Yeah, we know Steve Alford has done such a great job in the league when he was at New Mexico. Prior to going to UCLA, when I was at Utah, he was at New Mexico. And, man, Darrington Hobson, I believe was the kid's name, that was an NBA player back then. But, yeah, just had tremendous teams, played with a lot of toughness and grit. He knows the league, and definitely some big losses in Harris, another Dallas guy that I got to give love to my Texas guys, Jalen Harris, who started his career at Louisiana Tech and then transferred in and sat out and was a really talented, really talented scorer. Will have a chance to, play in the NBA at the next level. And then you mentioned another Texas Dallas kid, Grant Sherfield, who transferred from Wichita State. Yeah, so that's definitely a big pickup for them, a guy who has some experience and can replace some of that scoring that was Harris left. But yeah, like I said, we know that coach knows how to get things going in this league. A lot of new faces, a lot of Lindsey Drew, another guy that's really hard to replace. I mean, he was on those Nevada teams with the Twins before he got hurt, and then he got hurt, I think, towards ACL or maybe Achilles, and was out for a season and a half.
Yeah, it was Achilles, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep, then came back and still had a good season and really good player in him. So losing two huge backcourt pieces, but we know that Coach Alford always kind of finds a way to get those guys going. Any other last thoughts on Nevada before we transition to New Mexico?
Yeah, I think like closing thought here is what their front court will look like, because there's a lot of moving parts there, and you have young guys coming in who I think could emerge. Obviously, the first one being KJ Himes, but another guy who I've heard good things about lately is Warren Washington, who's the Oregon State transfer. Another really big, lanky guy who, if nothing else, will be a bit of a post presence. I'd say he'll be a factor around the rim for them, and I think that's important because in most senses, I'd say Nevada is a little bit undersized, but they make up for that in some of their scoring and passing abilities. So Washington could be a guy who could really find his footing after playing sparingly at Oregon State, but I think that he could wind up carving out a pretty significant role. And Nevada, it's a lot like some of the other teams in this league. If they have some of their young talent step up, I think they could be really competitive.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's transition to New Mexico. We mentioned the coach from Air Force who was recently hired there. Let's talk more about their team and their program.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot like Nevada, they also have a number of seniors heading out. Jaquan Lyle is probably the most notable one, being the former Ohio State transfer. He did great things for the Lobos. Carlton Bragg as well. Vance Jackson transferred. So right off the bat, you have a number of your key contributors who are heading out. But I think New Mexico will probably recover pretty well. A lot of their fans are probably a bit disappointed with how the last couple seasons have gone, just because New Mexico has had so much talent on paper, but it hasn't necessarily come to fruition. They've had some tough losses, even after starting non-conference play pretty solidly the last couple of seasons. But I think this season it's going to be largely dependent on how a couple of their returning guys do. McQuatch Malwatch is a player who I've had my eyes on for quite a bit. Hasn't necessarily developed into a star in the league, but he's been really consistent, usually being around 10, 11 points per game and doing some small things for them. So I like him, and I think that with this now being his senior season, he's going to be relied upon to be the leader for them on and off the floor, and I think that's a good thing for Paul Weir and them. And also Keith McGee, another former transfer at guard. He's another one of their key returners, and I think he could do a good job. Those two playing alongside each other, that's a pretty interesting duo, and now they're going to have a lot more burden on their shoulders to do good things for the Lobos this season.
Yeah, Malawatch was there. He was a freshman, I think, when I was at Fresno State. Really good player even then. He started it's almost, I think, maybe in their third game this year. He probably will eclipse the 1,000-point score mark. So he's right on that pace. Talking to their staff, it sounds like they're really excited about having tremendous speed at all positions in the way that they like to play, and kind of having some press oriented things that they do, and some trapping and some different things. They try to be disruptive defensively. They love their team speed, their length, and they really like their toughness, which I think is something that's a great thing to always like about your team. It sounds like they feel like this team may be similar to Coach's first team that was there, that maybe didn't have as many big name talent guys, but feel like they have more gritty guys and guys that kind of fit the way that they want to play. I feel like they have a high octane defensive team. Talking to them. Not as great of a shooting team from the three as maybe they have been at times in the past, but something that they're excited about. You mentioned McGee, Keith McGee. I think that they're really excited about him as a senior, being a guy who's been in the program for a while. I believe he won a national championship in junior college at South Plains, and was one of their key players in that run. Coaches mentioned Rob Brown. They're excited about Francis and Singleton as far as some of their big transfers. Freshman class, looks like they have some guys that they're excited about. One of their redshirt guys, Byron, they're really excited about him. Has potential to break into the lineup at the 5. And it looks like a couple other notes that I had. Not the same top end talent that maybe they had, but really excited about their team and who they have and kind of how their competitive nature is and their buy-in. They've had a lot of challenges, it sounds like, as we know. New Mexico just being able to practice, being the fact that we're about to start, their state has been a lot more strict as far as some of their restrictions. So, yeah, share a little bit more about him. I think they mentioned a Javante Johnson as well, kind of a 2-3 with some big-time potential. that they're excited about.
Yeah, well, the first point, I'm really glad that you mentioned the parallels between Weir's first year,
Yeah,
because I think he did a fantastic job that first season, taking a roster that didn't really have many expectations and guiding them just a few baskets short of reaching the NCAA tournament.
right.
And that team was led by guys, off the top of my head, I know Antonio Jackson was there and Joe Furstinger was there. So it's like it's not really the same names that you have with Jaquan Lyle and Carlton Bragg and some of
Right,
these
right, right.
former five stars, but he did a really good job with them.
Yeah,
And
that year, just to interrupt you,
uh,
so when we were at Fresno, Deshaun Taylor's junior year, Bryson Williams sophomore year, um, Jerron Hopkins senior year, we were tied for third going into the conference tournament. We played in a double overtime, intense game at the pit
yep.
where they actually won that game in double overtime to finish third, and I think we ended up finishing fourth. But that team was really scrappy. There was no real star, or I don't even know if they had an all-conference player, first or second team. Maybe they did. Mathis was a young kid on that team who was really good at that time, kind of when he exploded in this new style of play. But yeah, they really didn't have a true superstar or a big name, but they were so scrappy and gritty, and they had kind of a power in numbers kind of team, a strength in numbers kind of team. So it sounds like they're similar to that again. But again, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and that's what gives me some hope for New Mexico this season, even though they've lost most of their key substantial pieces last year, is because I think Paul Weir just does a better job when his team is more of an underdog and he has some of these guys who are really scrappy and just get after it defensively. And the type of rotations that he implemented his first year, when they're pretty much just playing full basketball court. They're just trapping up and down the court and trying to get easy baskets and getting transition baskets. He's kind of shied away from that the last couple of seasons, but I think in hearing what you have to say about some of these individuals, I think if they're able to re-implement that type of system, even if it isn't for 40 minutes a game, if it's just, after the under 12 timeout, you just bring in a press defense to get an easy basket here and there, I think that makes New Mexico a lot better. So a lot of some of these newcomers that you mentioned are pretty intriguing, and having some senior leadership in McGee and Malwatch, I think, makes New Mexico one of these teams to watch out for. But a lot of JUCO guys, and I think Jeremiah Francis, so long as he's healthy, I think that's going to be an absolutely massive addition for them. But again, he hasn't played a full season because of injury in I don't even know how many years, going all the way back to his high school days. So you hope that he can stay healthy, because if he does, I think that's a really good transition for them, going to a high level talent, former North Carolina commit, who can do some really special things. So Paul Weir, I mean, he could do a pretty good job with New Mexico this season. I'm intrigued to see what they have in store.
Yeah, and again, some new changes to the staff. Congratulations to Coach Dave Pilipovich from Air Force getting hired, and also for Ralph Davis getting promoted to assistant coach. So looking forward to seeing Lobos. They always kind of bring some interesting elements to Mountain West, and it sounds like they're really excited about their team and the direction they're headed in. Let's talk San Diego State, the reigning champion from last year. What a magical, once in a lifetime type season they had. Really, really unfortunate that they didn't get a chance to be able to have that 1 seed, like you said, or 2 seed that they had earned. Won 26 games in a row to start the year. One of the top teams in the country. Just had a special group that, could have been every bit of a Final Four team with what they had. So hate that they didn't get a chance to play in the postseason. Of course, Utah State won the tournament, and they would have been in the tournament as well. They had a great season, but let's talk about San Diego State.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it right off the bat. It's too bad that San Diego State didn't have a shot to really see how their season could have unfolded, because it's a team that had legitimate Final Four national championship aspirations. I think either this team or Kawhi's San Diego State team will be remembered as the best teams in Mountain West Conference history. Just how skilled they were, how dominant they were. But again, just like everyone else, they're turning the page to this upcoming season. And I still think that they are the top team in the Mountain West, even though they do have significant losses. Malachi Flynn, of course, being the most notable one. All-American, fantastic scorer, distributor, all defensive player in the conference, the defensive player of the year in the conference. That's going to be such a sizable loss for them, but I think that they are able to make up for that loss pretty well with Terrell Gomez from Cal State Northridge coming in. It's going to be pretty intriguing to see what they do with Gomez versus what they did with Flynn, because I would say it's a very different skill set. Gomez is more of a knockdown shooter. He's been one of the top 3-point shooters in the nation the last few seasons, just hitting at a huge clip, hitting a ton of threes. So that's always going to make San Diego State a threat from the perimeter. But it's very different skill set in that Gomez stands at just 5'8". I want to say, you probably know this better than I do, I think Flynn was maybe 6'3", 6'4". So he had, several inches on Gomez. So that in itself will be a bit of a difference right there. And I think also getting Gomez up to speed defensively, SDSU is always going to be a team that leans heavily on what they do on the defensive end, playing really scrappy man-to-man defense. So if they can get Gomez up to speed, he has talent and can shoot the ball really well. If that transition from Flynn to Gomez goes pretty well, I think San Diego State will remain the top team in the conference, especially because you still bring back guys like Matt Mitchell, who's legitimate player of the year candidate at the wing. He's developed quite a bit. And also Jordan Shackle, who's a knockdown perimeter shooter and does some really good things as well.
Yeah, so San Diego State is, Coach Dutcher has done such a tremendous job. I think in talking to their staff, they mentioned this, which I was blown away by this stat. But a lot of these guys have been there for so long. Dutcher's been there 22 years. And some of those original guys that worked there with Coach, so 3 times they've won 20 games in a row during their run there. Three different years that they've had that happen. Which I just thought was kind of an incredible thing. Last year, obviously 26, you talked about Kawhi's year, and there was one other moment where they had that kind of a run. So definitely have it in them to just kind of get hot. And I think the year that I was my last year at Fresno State, I think they ended up going to the tournament because they won the tournament, played Houston in the first round or second round. But they won the tournament, and at the time, they got hot at the end of the year and really weren't supposed to be a team that was supposed to do that at that time. So love that about their ability to just get hot, and Coach Dutcher coaches them to play their best basketball toward the end of the year. They're really excited about their group. Definitely a much different group. You can't really replace a magical season automatically just like that. It's going to look different. But it sounds like they love the character of their group. Unbelievable character and work ethic was one of the comments that the coaches said. 6 seniors, so they're an older team. Love the fact they have some guys back from last year's team that don't necessarily want to do the exact same thing, but they definitely want to finish the taste that they didn't get to finish in their mouth as far as not only championship but making that NCAA tournament run. So they have some hungry guys. Coached against Gomez when he was a freshman at Fresno State. He was a freshman at Northridge, and I think it might have been his first college game, and I think he might have had 15 or more. And impressive, competitive guy. Definitely a guy at his stature, like you said, 5'8", and that may be being kind. I don't know his actual height. I think that's what they list him at. But what a competitive kid, and what a great career of proving himself he's done at Northridge. It sounds like they love the fact that he can really shoot the basketball. He's a guy who shoots it at a high level, which always kind of makes the floor stay open. Then very different than Malachi Flynn. One of the better free throw shooters in the country as well. So doesn't get fouled a ton, but definitely a guy who can make free throws. Looks like they're really excited about their grad transfer from Maryland. He's a big who's really been coached. They feel like in that program just hadn't gotten the game reps. So looking forward to him kind of developing. It sounds like they are. They think their team really shoots the ball well, and they share the ball like crazy. The ball doesn't stick. The ball continues to move from hand to hand, and they think that allows them to have great ball movement, which makes them harder to key in on, and any guy can kind of get going. So they're excited. They had to come back to reality after the Magic year, of course, but they're excited about their group from talking to their staff.
Yeah, it's an intriguing team, and I think that you mentioned it right there. I want to see what makes the Aztecs so good is that they share the ball. And I think in the final seasons that Steve Fisher was there, and also Brian Dutcher's first year, even though they made the NCAA tournament, there was just kind of this missing element within them. And I think a lot of that comes down to what they did offensively. And you can see when they are on their A game with a player like Malachi Flynn, and you're not always going to wind up with a guard like Malachi Flynn. He's kind of a once in a generational type player, but when they do share the ball, I think they can be really effective. I want to say this season's team will probably be a bit more offensive oriented than some of the teams in the past, just because of their shooting. But I think a key returner for them is going to be Nathan Mensah, who I really like quite a bit. I think he plays a lot like Neemias Queta in that he's a really strong defensive interior presence. He can block shots like crazy. He can attack the basket. He suffered, I believe it was a blood clot in his lung, which forced him to miss the second half of the season. And so far, it seems like he's good to go. And I think that's really good news for San Diego State moving forward. Now that they don't have Yanni Wetzel on the team anymore, who's graduated, it's going to be a bit of a different team. Transitioning from what last year's dominant team was. I think they're probably going to have some early hiccups just because it is a new group with new faces. But overall, I like the Aztecs a lot and think that they could be pretty special offensively once again.
Yeah, you picked them to win in Mountain West, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So San Diego State, you have picked it. They did mention this too, that they have the hardest non-conference schedule that they've ever had. I don't know if that's because of COVID and the travel, but they open with a couple teams that are picked to win their league in UCLA and Irvine. They play at Arizona State, play St. Mary's, they play BYU. So they're definitely going to be challenged and tested early. But the good thing about all of that is, it comes down to conference play, and I think they'll be playing their best basketball as they usually do when it comes time for the end of the year. So staying in California, transitioning from San Diego State to San Jose State. Let's talk about the Spartans.
Yeah, San Jose State, obviously, we can talk on and on about how much they've struggled in the Mountain West. Unfortunately, they've had a fair share of challenging seasons, but I think this off-season is a kind of a nice breath of fresh air for them. Gene Prelo is going to get back his top two scorers, I believe, for the first time in his tenure there. And for several seasons, you've seen San Jose State lose either their top two scorers, top three scorers, but they've had so many players leave the program. And if they had just stuck with the program another season, I think San Jose State could have climbed up the Mountain West ladder a little bit. So it's good news for San Jose State. They returned Seneca Knight, who now with some of those guys that I mentioned earlier being the senior departures, I think Knight could probably be the top scorer in the league. He averaged 17 a game this past season. I think he could be relied upon to maybe score 19 or 20 this year, depending on how things go. Just a fantastic scorer, does really good things there, and he has a really good wingman in Richard Washington, who's another double-digit scorer. And San Jose State has struggled quite a bit offensively during Prelo's tenure. It's just been a bit of a challenge transitioning. I remember talking to him a couple years back about how his main focus was just making sure that his team didn't turn the ball over and making sure that they just get quality shots. And I think that they've been able to do a lot better in those two categories. Now it's just a matter of being more efficient, making sure that the ball goes in the basket, and just making sure that you're not turning it over. But having those two guys back, I think, is really good news for the program. You can say what you want about the other pieces on the team, but having that continuity in quality scores, I think, is pretty big for them.
Yeah, Coach Prelo, what a quality person and coach and intelligent guy. And it's a challenging job, San Jose State. Let's just call it what it is. I mean, the just the setup in terms of resources and everything else. There's definitely a top end to this league, and San Jose State's not quite in the top end of that. But having two guys back that are returning scorers always helps you to build around those guys, and those guys have experience. I think Coach will find a way to get this team to be even more competitive on the offensive end, like you said. And I think that with those two guys coming back with some additions and having some continuity, they'll have a chance to have one of their better seasons that they've had since Coach has been there. So we'll transition to UNLV.
Yeah, and I think with – oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry, you had a little delay.
Sorry about that. Just a closing thought on them. I think that they have some newcomers who could step up. One of the guys, I mean, Gene Prelo is going to be digging into the California basket quite a bit. I think that's going to be his route towards making San Jose State a quality program again, is finding those diamonds in the rough in the California area. And one guy who I like quite a bit is a freshman coming in, is Sebastian Mendoza. He's been really productive in his high school career, 6'3", but he can score the basketball pretty well and rebounds extremely well for his position. And I don't necessarily know what his rotation or what his role is going to be like this upcoming season, but I would have to imagine that he at least gets a shot with some of these other new guys coming in to at least carve out a role. So he could be a player to watch. Some of these other newcomers coming in could be pretty good. Michael Ofegbu is another guy, 6'7" wing forward type player. So once again, a lot of California guys coming in who I think could do a pretty quality job. And again, having those two scorers back is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, again, anytime you can have those guys back, it just makes such a huge difference for your ability to have some comfort level and some confidence going into the beginning of the year. Let's switch to the Rebels. What do you think about UNLV? Coach did such a great job in his first year. Probably exceeded expectations. Again, just such a competitive group. So yeah, tell us about UNLV.
Yeah, I think UNLV fans probably had some reservations about hiring a coach from South Dakota State. It's not really a flashy hire. TJ Otzelberger is not. I know some of the names that came up in that coaching search were Rick Pitino, Mike Miller, some of these guys who, again, would bring a lot of flash, but might not necessarily be the best fit. But TJ did a great job his first season guiding this program to their most conference wins, I want to say, since Dave Rice was there. I think they went 12-6 a year ago. So they had a really good season. I think they surprised quite a bit, and they do get a lot of these pieces back. The first one, of course, being Bryce Hamilton, who's gone from he was a former top 100 recruit who was probably a bit underwhelming his first season, but I mean, he's really broken out and is now, just like Seneca Knight, he's one of the top scorers in the conference. Does a little bit of everything, can score all three levels, attacks the basket well. He's probably going to be one of the top scorers out west, just all the things that he does well. And he has a really good sidekick now, David Jenkins Jr., who's the South Dakota State transfer, who previously played under Otzelberger alongside Mike Dahm, another great scorer who can hit threes like crazy. I think his career three-point average is well above 40%, just does a lot of really good things. So having those two guys will immediately make UNLV a threat just based on how well they score. They could probably put up 35 a night, just depending on how things go. So you have those two, and then a lot of quality pieces around them. And Mbake Jong is a great great interior presence, blocks shots like crazy. I think if he can develop a bit more offensively, then UNLV could definitely be up in the top 2, top 3 ranks of the Mountain West, just based on those core players that they have.
Yeah, we haven't talked overall about your predictions for the league. Where do you have them fitting in, and what do they need to have happen to kind of get into that competing for conference championship? Because again, last year they exceeded expectations, finished higher than what people predicted them to do. So what do you think it is this year that maybe that they can, if they can just kind of get this one thing to turn? Where did you pick them, and how can they kind of jump to compete with San Diego State and Boise State?
Yeah, so I had UNLV 4th in my projections, and again, that's behind San Diego State, Boise State, and Utah State. And I think that they're right in that mix. I think for so long this team has struggled with just knocking down shots. I think jump shooting was a struggle for them in the latter part of Marvin Menzies' tenure there. They still had a bit of a struggle with that this past season. But I think hitting shots and making sure that they pass the ball well is going to be key. The notable loss for them is Amari Hardy, who transferred to Oregon. He was their lead guard, and he did a really good job in pick and roll, developing some good plays and good offense for them. Now they're going to transition, I would imagine, to Marvin Coleman, who he had bright spots this past season. It wasn't always the most consistent, but you can, again, see the talent coming through and him being a really good distributor for them. So I would say that he's a big X factor. If he plays like a quality distributor, if he's one of the top point guards in the conference, I think UNLV could be really, really good. But I think it's all going to come down to point guard play now that you do have the shooters on the team and you do have that good rim protector in Mbake Zhang. If Coleman steps up, I think UNLV could reasonably compete for the conference title.
Yeah, excited to see what they'll do. You mentioned Utah State being picked third. We'll transition to them next. Tell us what you think about the Aggies.
Yeah, it's a lot like San Diego State. It's going to be tough for them to move on from this past season. What Sam Merrill did for the program will never be understated. He was the hometown kid and just a great guy to talk to, and just a fantastic competitor and fantastic player. It's a shame that he wasn't able to wrap up his career the way he wanted to with the Aggies, but they'll be now heading into this season, finding a way to replace Merrill. And I think Utah State should feel good about where they're at with their front court. I love the trio that they have. Neemias Queta, who I think a lot of people expected could have been a one-and-done guy. He's now back for year 3 and an all-leaguer, defensive player of the year, just does a ton of great things. It might be his final season at Utah State. I guess time will tell on that. But regardless, so long as he's healthy, so long as his knees are good, I think that he will always keep Utah State competitive. And then his wingman there, Justin Bean, who has gone as a former walk-on to now one of the most productive players, not only in the Mountain West, but also in the whole entire country, just being a consistent double-double threat. He scores 12 points and you wouldn't even realize that he scored once. He's just a really interesting player, and he does the little things, but he rebounds the basketball well. He distributes it well. Just a really competitive guy. So having those two players back, I think, will keep Utah State towards the top of the conference, but it will come down to what their backcourt looks like. I know Craig Smith and his staff, they put out a bunch of flyers for grad transfer guards in the spring, and they all came up empty. I think they had at least 6 or 7 guys they had their eyes on, and they all went elsewhere. It's just what happens with the transfer market sometimes, and I know they would have wished to have gotten one of those guys, but that isn't the case. So now they'll rely on some of their newcomers that they have coming in. Marco Anthony, the Virginia transfer, is probably the most notable, who didn't really get much playing time with Tony Bennett, but just the fact that he has been coached by Tony Bennett and now had the sit-out year with Craig Smith, I think that gives the Aggies a lot of hope that he could wind up being a pretty solid player for them.
Yeah, another Texas guy. I always got to show love to my Texas guys. Know Marco pretty well. San Antonio kid. Competitive kid, tough kid, hard-nosed. It makes sense why Virginia recruited him because of kind of his makeup, and just such a winner. So I think he'll do well there. I think he'll find a way to especially after sitting out a year, I think he'll find a way to transition. And, Coach Smith just does such a good job kind of figuring out how to maximize players and kind of help them to be efficient in their role and really thrive and kind of Sam Merrill, what he did, again, coached against him when he was a sophomore. To think that a year later was a new staff, he would be the player of the year in the league. I don't think anyone would have thought that. So credit to the staff and to Coach to Sam Merrill. Trimmed down, lost some weight, but also I think he was above 90 from the free throw line, above 50 from the floor, and above 40 from 3, which is, very rare do you have guys that can put up those kind of numbers and average 20-something a game. So I hate that, like you said, he didn't get a chance to end his career kind of playing in the NCAA tournament. And you mentioned Queta. I think most people thought he was going to be a one-and-done guy, had a potential to do that. And then the fact that the injury happened and now he's back for a third year. Mountain West opponents aren't super excited about that, but Utah State will definitely compete at the top of the league. Coach has just done such a great job everywhere he's been, and kind of look forward to seeing how they make it all work with this new looking group.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who still have Utah State pegged as maybe the third place or second place team in the Mountain West, I think a lot of them will point to Craig Smith and what he's done. I think he's gained the trust from a lot of people around the league that no matter what, he's going to get his guys playing really good basketball. And both of the past 2 seasons, they wound up winning the Mountain West tournament, but they had a pair of hiccups, say December and January. And there was a good portion of last season where Utah State wasn't even really close to the bubble with some of their losses that they had early. They had a tough start to conference play, but past 2 years, they turned it around in February and always played their best basketball in March. And I would imagine that's going to be the same case this season because you do have some departures. You have new guys coming in. And so I would imagine it just gets better with time. And going back to the COVID shortened off season, it's going to be tough for some of these newcomers to gain that experience until they actually play games. But Utah they've got good pieces coming in as well. I mean, I like Brock Miller, who's one of their returning guys, and I think he took a bit of a dip this past season. He's a really capable 3-point shooter, but the percentages didn't really show that. This past year, he took a pretty substantial dip in his 3-point percentage. If he can kind of calm down the backcourt and improve the shooting, the points will have to come from somewhere with Sam Merrill leaving. So I think he's a guy that you could look at as another route for offense. Sean Bairstow, who's the brother of Cameron Bairstow, who obviously we're familiar with in the Mountain West. He could be pretty special in due time, and they also have some quality guys coming in. A lot of these freshmen coming from the Rocky Mountain area, I don't exactly know what to expect with them being unranked commits, but it was the same case with Sam Merrill. He wasn't really a known guy heading into the Utah State program, and look what he did. So I think you have potential breakouts all along the roster, and I would imagine they can still be within that 20 to 25 win range and finish maybe top 3 in the Mountain West.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think, like you said, giving the fact that Coach Smith has done such a great job and his staff, I think that's probably why a lot of people give them the credit that they give them to pick them as high as they have. And speaking of coaches, the new face in the league, let's talk about Coach Linder's squad with Wyoming. Coach Linder coming from Northern Colorado, where he did such a great job there. A former Boise State associate head coach, so knows the Mountain West very well, and will do a great job at Wyoming. Has already made some noise a little bit on the recruiting trail. So Wyoming, we know, finished the year under Coach Edwards, did a good job in the tournament and made a run and played some of their absolute best basketball in the conference tournament. So some of those guys back, I believe they have 4 of those guys back returning, and added some young, talented freshmen that they like, and looks like they have a great foundation to kind of start their winning ways there in Wyoming.
Yeah, definitely. I think with Jeff Linder, I think it's really important for him to get some of these guys back. I mean, as you know, when coaching staffs leave, so much of that talent also leaves. And that's been especially the case in the Mountain West, where some of these coaches are either fired or take new jobs, and a lot of those starters head out of the program. But that wasn't the case with Wyoming, and I think that's already a credit to Jeff Linder, bringing back Hunter Maldonado, who is a great, I want to say 6'7" wing, does a little bit of everything. He can score, he can rebound, he can distribute the basketball, plays good defense. Having him back is massive for them. Just not only from a leadership perspective, but from a production perspective as well. The other Hunter Thompson, a good stretch 4 who can knock down shots, and he did a good job with that in the Mountain West tournament when they went on that run. So those 2 guys are worth watching. And then the other one who I really like, returner, is Quan Marble. And we saw the signs with him, especially late in the season, him being a freshman and coming in and really having an impact down the stretch. Wyoming was off the map for most of the season just with the struggles that they had, but they went neck and neck with Utah State in the Mountain West semifinal, and I don't think anyone even expected them to win a single game. They were the first 11 seed in the Mountain West tournament history to even win a single game, and they won 2 of them. So I think if they're able to maintain that same competitiveness that they had at the end of the year, which I expect them to do so, they could easily be seen as a breakout team in this conference. And then you combine that with the fact that Linder is bringing in some of these guys that he had committed over at Northern Colorado. The one who I really, really like, who I think could potentially be their freshman of the year, is Marcus Williams. Another nod to Texas there. Yeah.
Shout out to Texas. Got his rep down.
Yeah, absolutely. Great score. And I know that Linder's been on quote several times talking about his distributing abilities. And I think Wyoming's had a good long line of quality lead guards. Justin James, of course, being the most recent one. I don't know that he'll be Justin James in his first year, but I think he could do some really special things. And now that they have some returning guys, some seniors, some experience on that team, I think Wyoming could creep up the standings quite a bit.
We got a comment from our Creative Coaching Podcast. If you haven't listened to Creative Coaching Podcast, definitely subscribe, definitely listen. Mike Lopez does a phenomenal job out of San Antonio. Thanks for the comment, Coach. He says Texas boys are different. I'm biased, so I'm from Texas, so I'm always gonna rep for those guys. And Kenny DeWeese, one of the assistants at Wyoming, he's always done a great job recruiting Texas. Another Texas guy. So yeah, Marcus Williams, we can get into him, but you also talked about some of the guys that played well. Again, just I think anytime you can play well in the tournament, and that's how you ended your season, you have some guys back. That gives you a great chance to build on that. We've talked about that with other teams. Obviously, they have a new coach, and the coach, Coach Edwards, did a tremendous job at Wyoming for some stretch and having them be one of the better teams in the conference. Unfortunately, in college coaching, there's transitions that have to be made sometimes. So that transition's made. Coach Linder is now the head coach, and Marble played really well in the tournament as well. You talked about that, and so he's a young guy that has a chance to get some steam going for his career. I think Hunter Maldonado, you talked about it. He's one of the better guards, I believe, an all-conference level player. He was a freshman, I believe, when I was at coaching the league at Fresno State, and you could see it then. He had a chance to be pretty good, and I think he'll do great things under Coach Linder as he kind of ended his season last year doing that. And, yeah, they love their freshmen. Marcus Williams, they talked about just having an incredible feel and vision for the game. Can kind of do all things on the offensive end. He can shoot it. He's a high-level athlete, surprisingly. He's a winner. They refer to him as being a dog and a worker, a guy who just loves being in the gym. So kind of like Mike Lopez said, those Texas boys are built different. He's definitely a dog, and signed with those guys at Northern Colorado, and is a younger kid too. He's a young kid age-wise, so they feel great about his upside, his ability to learn, and like you said, definitely a candidate that should probably be at the top of everybody's list as far as freshman of the year candidates. They also like Jeremiah Odin, really versatile 6'8" player who can dribble, pass, shoot, play in ball screens. He can set ball screens. He has a crazy high motor, very versatile, plays the 3 and the 4, a high major talent. They feel like they really got one in him. Just kind of in the recruiting trail when they were able to make the move up to from Northern Colorado to Wyoming. I think it came down to maybe them in California, Pac-12 school, and they were able to kind of get him to commit to them. But can shoot threes, can handle, so he'll be another guy kind of on the list of freshman of the year candidate just because of his talent and ability and the role he should be able to play right away. And then the Xavier Dussel kid they were excited about, a Phoenix kid, catch and shoot, has a great IQ. We know Coach Linder likes those guys that can shoot from his Northern Colorado time. So expect him to be an efficient team. Ken Palm ratings, they normally have had some great ratings with Coach Linder at UNC. But they love their team. They say they get in the gym. They have a character group. They're excited about the group. They love the foundational pieces they've been able to kind of acquire. They didn't want to just take guys late just because they had a new job and just trying to fill talent. They wanted to make sure they got the right guys, and they were patient. They have the 4 guys that are back, bought in to the new culture, and the new guys are new. They don't know any other culture, so they seem to be really excited about what they have out in Wyoming.
Yeah, it's a lot of good stuff there, and as you mentioned, a lot of these freshmen who are coming in, they had pretty substantial offers from either the Pac-12 or out in the WCC, some of the good programs out there. So that some of these talent evaluators think that these players are pretty talented. So I like them. It's a good mix of experience and also incoming depth. I just think for both Maldonado and Thompson, I think that taste of March success, winning those 2 games of the Mountain West tournament, I can understand why some people would think it's a little overstated talking about just 80 minutes of basketball, but having the season that they had where they got blown out or they were unable to score points, having that late season momentum and realizing that had they just scored a few more baskets against Utah State, they'd have 40 minutes to compete for an NCAA tournament berth. after really, I think Thompson and Maldonado will really preach that this upcoming season now as the senior leaders on the team, and just say like, hey, we've had some really challenging years, but we've still been that close to reaching the Mountain West tournament title game. So it's a good building block for them, and I think that they could be in for a pretty good bounce back year.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I'm excited. I'm not too far away from those guys where I'm living currently in Colorado, so looking forward to sneaking up to see all the Mountain West games. I'll be able to see a lot of Colorado State and at Wyoming, so I'm looking forward to kind of seeing firsthand what great things they're going to do. So yeah, we'll kind of make a quick transition. Eli, if you don't mind, just kind of share again a little bit about Heat Check and some of the things you do to cover the Mountain West, and then we'll end with 5 big questions in the Mountain West, and we'll close the show.
All right, that sounds good. So over at heatcheckcbb.com, we've made a new website. We're focused on really high-quality national college basketball coverage. It's not all going to be about Duke and Kentucky. We like to share the wealth a little bit, talk about some of the little guys, and cover some things that you might not know or you might not know a ton about in the world of college basketball, but really good writing staff. We're obviously thrilled to have you as part of the team and bringing that podcast together. So we're excited about that and really excited for next week when we unveil the Heat Check side of what we're doing here.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm excited to be a part of it too as I journey into this pivot from college coaching and doing some other things. So thanks so much for being a part of it and allowing me to be a part of the squad. So we'll end with the 5 big questions in the Mountain West. We will start just the non-conference schedule. Let's talk non-conference schedule.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a ton of moving parts, and it might change by the time that we're just done wrapping up this show. But talking to some of the assistants in the league, I think everyone is just trying to find quality games on their schedule. A lot of these programs had been involved in some of these MTE, the multi-team events that are so often really good schedule builders for these teams. And I mean, in the case of Air Force and Nevada, I know both of their tournament events were canceled. I want to say both of them were in the Cayman Islands. So that's tough for them. San Diego State's had to make a lot of adjustments. They were, I can't even remember at this point what their initial tournament was, but they were supposed to then go out to Orlando for some games, and now they're going to be hosting their own MTE, as you mentioned, against UCLA and Irvine. So those will be really good games off the bat. Boise State at one point had a game scheduled against Kansas. They've had a bunch of moving parts as well. So I think everyone's just kind of scrambling for just trying to put together as many games as they can. And I'll always go back to this with what San Diego State did this time last year is I think that they truly realized that they had a good team in store. And what they did is they tried to schedule up the best that they could. They got really good games on their schedule. I know they had games against Creighton and Iowa, and a lot of those teams wound up being quality tournament level teams, and that helped boost San Diego State's profile into a possible number 1 and a number 2 seed. But with it being with COVID-19 going on, I think everyone's just trying to make the schedule work for what they have in store. But as is always the case, I'm sure you know this as well as anyone. Scheduling the Mountain West is just a challenge. A lot of the power conference coaches either don't want to play or they already have games slotted, and I think everyone's just trying to make the most of it.
Yeah, scheduling is always hard, especially when you're at this level of this high of a mid-major conference with a lot of high major players within the conference. It doesn't always seem like a benefit for bigger schools or for high major schools to play a Mountain West school, but given the fact we're dealing with COVID and have so many challenges in front of the schedule for everybody, just trying to figure out how to get the games on the schedule and let's just go play and figure it out because there's so many changes that have happened, so many variables. So I think definitely traveling within location that you can drive to has a lot to do with it too, and not having to get on flights. So the non-conference schedule will be interesting, and I don't know that it'll play a huge factor into the at-large equation. I think it can. I just think it's such a weird year. Anytime you can just get some games on the schedule that you can successfully play is a success in this season. Let's talk about the conference schedule. I believe they added 2 more games to the conference schedule. Let's talk a little bit about that. I don't know that it's come out yet, but let's talk a little bit about the conference schedule.
Yeah, the official schedule, to my knowledge, hasn't been released yet. The Mountain West initially released their standard 18-game schedule, which has that built-in bye week, with it being an odd number of teams in the league. But they've since reversed course, and I think a lot of that has to go back to what's going on in, say, New Mexico, for example, with their strict COVID-19 regulations. And California's obviously had their bouts with the pandemic. So I think it's a good move on the Mountain West part to up the schedule and also move the schedule up a week, I believe it is, which gives kind of some leeway if some of these games are postponed or canceled. I know that Wyoming has had a positive test within their program, which has forced them to quarantine. And I believe Fresno State, same case for them. So they unfortunately, it's already impacted the Mountain West a little bit, but I think transitioning from 18 games to 20 games is good for the league because you just know whether it's a Mountain West team or one of their opponents, it's just going to be the case that some of these games will be postponed. And it's unfortunate, but I think everyone, as you mentioned, is just trying to get as many games on their schedule as they can and bumping that up to 20 games. That double round robin format, everyone will play each other twice and teams will play, I believe, in the same location on, I would imagine, Wednesdays and Saturdays or either Thursdays and Saturdays. So you'll have a situation where, say, San Diego State will have road games at San Jose State, and I would imagine they play on a weekday and also on probably a Saturday. So it reduces travel, and I think it's a good move for the league so that they're able to fit in as many games as they can and have the least complications with COVID-19 as possible.
Right. No, I think just having those extra conference games. I hope that the goal for everyone is to get to 13 games. The race for 13 games to make sure you can be eligible for the postseason tournament. For NCAA tournament, and having 20 conference games. At least within your conference, if some reason you have to cancel a game or reschedule a game, that there's a great chance that can happen. Versus sometimes non-conference games that may get canceled, they just may never get made up. So that you may have some teams that may only play a much shorter number of games this year than normal. Let's talk about some of the new faces in the league. What are some of your favorite new faces on the sidelines, whether it be head or assistant coaches, and their impacts, and then some of the transfers or incoming freshmen?
Yeah, well, I think the two that we've mentioned, Jeff Linder and Joe Scott, both guys being familiar with the league. Joe Scott being the former head coach at Air Force, now heading back there. Good to see him returning to his roots. And also Jeff Linder, who spent some time with the Mountain West. And I think that familiarity goes a long way. A lot of the coaches who have either been hired on as head coaches or as assistant coaches, they've already had previous stops within the Mountain West. It's the same case with you at Utah, and I think that familiarity, it goes a long way in understanding some of these venues, some of the programs, the coaches around the league. So those are the two main coaches I'm looking out for. A lot of really good staffs in the Mountain West. That's always been the case, and these guys know what they're doing. Dave Filipovich, another guy who's transitioning over to New Mexico. So those are the two coaching adjustments and new faces that we have in the league. And I think on the court, the players' side, I think Terrell Gomez, as we've mentioned, is a key important piece for San Diego State. What they plan to do there. Boise State has a ton of guys who could really emerge. David Jenkins Jr. from UNLV, I'm super intrigued to see. And then you also have some freshmen who I think could carve out a pretty decent role. Braxton Mia at Fresno State, Marcus Williams at Wyoming, who we've touched on a little bit, and Utah State as well. Also digging into some of the international routes that they've had success with. Utah State's had a little bit of a pipeline with Portugal, with Diogo Brito and Amias Keita. Craig Smith knows what he's doing across the Atlantic over there. So I think that will be pretty intriguing, but everyone has a good mix of some new coming guys and also some experience. So I think most teams around the league kind of have the same general sense of what they have going on, even though it is a bit of a strange off season. But I think that all in all makes the league even more competitive.
Yeah, and you mentioned the coaching in the league and always having guys that know what they're doing is high-level coaches, high-level recruiters, high-level players. So you're never going to get it on that. Like the picks that you have for potential freshman of the year, and both Fresno State and Wyoming having some real candidates for that. Let's talk about just the elephant in the room as our fourth question. Just the ugly COVID. How will that affect things in the Mountain West, you think? How will it affect the games or whatever it may be? And so much unknowns, but just any comments or thoughts on kind of the elephant in the room?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to a little bit of our scheduling discussion, and I was pretty critical of the Mountain West when they released their 18 game schedule, just a standard 18 game as you would see in just about any other season. And the reason I was critical of that is because you just have to imagine that some of these games, unfortunately, will get postponed and will get canceled. Mountain West is such a geographically diverse league where you can have one game in the Bay Area, and then your next game can be in the Rocky Mountains, and then your next game after that can be in Albuquerque. So it's a lot of different things going on with some of these teams. But in terms of scheduling, I think they've made a good adjustment of transitioning to 20 games, going from the 18 game model to ensure that as many games are played as possible, and just doing a really good job of ensuring that these teams and these programs are doing the best they can with COVID.
Yeah, definitely. Just so many challenges and so many unknowns. I mean, you just don't know how it's going to look. And I think the one thing with hopefully is a little bit different for basketball because you're not a private plane, or even if you fly commercial, you don't have so many players like football that you fill up the entire plane for travel. So just the travel part of it and just figuring out. I mean, football has had some success. Obviously, college football, NFL has had some success, but had some bumps. We know that baseball had some success and had some bumps in the road. The NBA and WNBA were in a bubble, so that's much different, which sounds like the NCAA tournament is talking about having a bubble, but just not being in a bubble and having to travel and just the course of the season being as long as it is, starting in November and the end of November and going all the way to March, to just such a time period that so many things can happen with this COVID. And so definitely just praying for all the teams and everybody to stay safe. We don't want anything to happen to anyone as far as that goes. And we know there's some tough decisions that we have to make and work through, but that's kind of what will make this season what it is. It's just surviving and advancing, almost like March. It's going to feel like March every month with this COVID. So last question, two bid of the last few years. What are your thoughts on just being able to, the league overall, the NCAA tournament, projection, maybe not projection, but just who do you see can kind of get in that race? Do you see it as a two-bid league again? How does that picture look with all the variables in this season?
Yeah, it's an interesting season in the Mountain West because I think that you have, in most aspects, I think you have the two competitors up top with San Diego State and Boise State. That's what everyone seems to have. You can have them reversed if you want, but I'm still confident with San Diego State being the top dog in the conference. In terms of total bids for the postseason, it's been kind of different with the Mountain West because they've been able to get multiple bids into the tournament the last handful of years. But the reason for that is generally because the top seed in the league has lost in the Mountain West tournament. You've had San Diego State this past season, which cruised through conference play, and Utah State was right on the bubble. And I think a lot of people expected, had Utah State not beaten San Diego State, they would have missed out on the NCAA tournament. And the year before that with Nevada, they were expected to be the only lock in the NCAA tournament, and Utah State beat them that year. So it's been a struggle for the number one seed in March in the Mountain West tournament. And I think that is probably what it comes down to again. If San Diego State is a one seed and they've carved out some nice wins, I think that they will be probably maybe in that 8 to 10 seed range for the NCAA tournament. It could go a variety of ways, but if a team like Boise State or Colorado State or UNLV, if one of those teams can sneak up and make a run in the Mountain West tournament, I think you could probably peg this as a two-bid league once again.
Yeah, so the teams you have picked at the top, you have preseason San Diego State 1, Boise 2, Utah State 3, UNLV 4, and Colorado State 5. So it looks like just from the kind of going over everybody in the league and going over the show, today, it looks like it could be any of those 5 teams that could possibly be the 2 bids in there. But we also know there's always kind of that wild card, dark horse, whether it be Fresno State, whether it be Nevada, whether it be Wyoming, or somebody that can just kind of get hot in the tournament setting. You just never know because of the high level of basketball that's played in this league. So we got one more comment from one of our viewers. It looks like an old friend, but a goodie. Thanks, John Weisbrod, for watching the show. I coached his son at Lamar, who was he was actually a JUCO All-American, first-team JUCO All-American at Lamar State, and then was a 2-time first-team All-Conference guy for us at Lamar, and played some pro overseas. Brian, the Christian man, great husband, great father, a coach who changes kids. He coaches lives. Thanks so much, John. Thanks for tuning in, man. Enjoy coaching your son. Thanks for putting up with me and recruiting him and all the good stuff that happened there, man. And proud of what he's doing. And he's a father of 2 and married and doing great things in his life. So, yeah, thanks so much, everybody, for joining. We're at the hour and 40 mark for our preview. We'll be every other week, bi-weekly. We'll cover the league and talk about the league and dive in. We'll continue to evolve as far as fun ways that you guys can stay interactive and have some input in the league and some fun things we do on the show to cover the league. But, yeah, thanks so much, Eli, for being the real intel and have all the insights and knowledge of the league. We got one more comment, it looks like, one more question from Paris Dragons. Shout out to the Paris Dragons. I coached junior college there, coached Jonathan Simmons back there, who was an NBA guy. Who do you think will be the top newcomer in the league?
Well, if we're going only freshman, I would say Marcus Williams for Wyoming. I think that he's going to have a really big role for the Cowboys, and I expect him to put up big numbers. But I think if we're including transfers, I think it would be pretty tough to go against Terrell Gomez. I think he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot with San Diego State, and I think that the Aztecs have carved out a really good role for what their point guard position looks like. So I'll probably go with Gomez for a transfer and Williams for a freshman.
Yeah, great question from the Paris Dragon basketball family. Thanks so much for tuning in and giving us a great question. But yeah, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. We'll be every other week here, same time, same channel, same location. Eli, thanks again for your great coverage. Next week we'll be doing Heat Check College Basketball, which will definitely give us a different element where we cover mid-major basketball across the country and some of the hot topics. So thanks so much again, Eli. I'll give your final thoughts, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, this is a really good time. I'm looking forward to what this season looks like and what we plan to do with it. So really excited to get going. This is a lot of fun, and we'll be really ramped up and excited to go for next Tuesday.
Thanks so much again, everyone, and we'll see you guys next week.